Many Americans today are uninformed and unsure about America's founding fathers and their original intent for our nation's Constitution. What inspired the writings that founded the most successful nation in all of history? Are there really traces of biblical truth and influence within the Constitution? Or do we have, as many historians now claim, a godless Constitution? Is the United States, as many once believed, a Christian nation? What are the characteristics of such a nation? And is a Christian nation, as many historians now teach, an intolerant and cruel society? Discover the forgotten and astonishing story of our nation's foundation in the American Heritage series. For centuries, Americans were taught a truthful view of history that recognized the godly heroes and moral foundation our nation was founded upon. But in recent years, a new version of history has assaulted the moral and spiritual fiber of our nation, leaving the truth of our past eliminated and forgotten until today. Join historian David Barton and experience the untold story of our nation's history in the American Heritage series. A closer look into our nation's history reveals surprising and irrefutable evidence of the Bible's influence on our founding fathers and our nation's Constitution. But does a biblically inspired Constitution make America a Christian nation? And is there a place for the Bible in today's modern political climate? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
The Constitution has produced a real stability and a real prosperity in America that make us quite different from other nations. And that Constitution was framed largely by Christian individuals who used many biblical ideas for what they did in that Constitution. Right. So it's not a secular document. Now we hear that it is, and one of the interesting textbooks I find in use across the nation is this document right here. This little textbook is called The Godless Constitution. Now that's a fairly interesting title for a book, and it's written by a couple of professors. They go through and say, oh, it is a godless document. This nonsense about being religious people involved or religious ideas involved, it just doesn't happen.
But is that a cross there I see on the front of that book?
Well, it almost looks like it. It looks like it. But, you know, one of the most interesting aspects of this book is not how many PhDs they have after their name, because they got plenty. It's at the back of the book. These guys, we've got their picture, we have their bio, and at the back of the book they tell us the sources for their claim, because they claim that it's a godless Constitution. So what they give us here is a note on sources. So now we're looking for all the documentation that proves it's godless. Well, right up top they say we have dispensed with the usual scholarly apparatus of footnotes. Whoa, time out. You say it's a godless Constitution, but you're not going to document that. We just have to trust you. And so what they say is oh, everyone knows this, so we're not going to use any footnotes. We're not going to document. What an amazing thing for an academic textbook to give no sources for their citations except just trust us. We're PhDs. We know what we're talking about.
Wow.
Now, that's widely used. Most students don't know the difference. They don't know to go ask those guys. No. Why do you say that? Why do you say it's godless? Why do you say the founding fathers were atheist, agnostic? Where's your proof? Oh, everybody knows it. That's a very poor excuse for saying that it's godless. On the other side, you got books like that one, Original Intent, that says exactly the opposite. 1,500 footnotes. 87% of the footnotes come from the founding fathers' own life while they were still alive.
Wow.
So when you use their documents, you reach a conclusion that says it's not godless. When you ignore all the documents, you can say, trust us, it's godless Constitution. Now, this is revisionism designed to have an impact on our behavior and our policy. So what happens is judges will quote that and say it's a godless Constitution, so you can't have this religious liberty, this religious display, whatever. But that's not based on history. Now, the intellectual side comes in and says, well, if it's not godless, what proof is there that God's involved in it? And there are half a dozen proofs that unequivocally show the Constitution not only is not godless, it is very Christian in its construction orientation. America is now the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. Our Constitution was an original and unique American document It was not a compilation of the best clauses of other constitutions from across the world. No, our Constitution contained ideas that had not before appeared in written constitutions. New and novel practices like the separation of powers and checks and balances. Practices like republicanism. So where did the founders get their specific ideas for this most successful of all constitutions? In an attempt to answer this question, a group of political scientists embarked on an ambitious 10-year project to analyze some 15,000 writings from the founding era. Those writings were examined with the goal of isolating and identifying the specific political sources quoted during the era surrounding the establishment of American government. If the source of the quotes could be identified, then the origin of the founders' political ideas could be determined. From the 15,000 writings selected, the researchers isolated some 3,154 quotations and documented the original sources of those quotes. It turned out that the single most quoted source in the writings of the founding era was the Bible. 34% of the documented quotes were taken from the Bible, a percentage almost 4 times higher than the second most quoted source. In fact, signers of the Constitution George Washington and Alexander Hamilton confirmed that the separation of powers was based on the biblical principle found in Jeremiah 17:9, a verse that had been the subject of numerous sermons during the founding era. Many other Bible verses and principles also find embodiment in the Constitution. For example, compare the Article 1, Section 8 provision on uniform immigration laws with Leviticus 19:34. The Article 2, Section 1 provision that a president must be a natural-born citizen, compare that with Deuteronomy 17:15. Then the Article 3, Section 3 provision regarding witnesses and capital punishment, compare that with Deuteronomy 17:6. And the Article 3, Section 3 provision against attainder, compare that with Ezekiel 18:20. And notice that Isaiah 33:22 sets forth 3 branches of government. And Ezra 7:24 establishes the type of tax exemptions that the founders gave to our churches and which still exist today. And the concept of republicanism set forth in Article 4, Section 4, that is, of electing our leaders at the local, county, state, and federal levels, has its origins in Exodus 18:21. In fact, Noah Webster, the founder personally responsible for Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 8 of the U.S. Constitution, specifically cites Exodus 18:21. And John Jay and George Washington also attributed religious causes as the reason that America elected its own leaders. Understanding that many of the ideas that found embodiment in our government were taken from the Bible, it's not surprising that John Adams had identified Christians and ministers as being so influential in American independence. In fact, nearly 4 decades after the American Revolution, John Adams reaffirmed this position, declaring,
"The general principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. Now I will avow that I then believed and now believe that those general principles of Christianity are as eternal and immutable as the existence and attributes of God."
A closer look into our nation's history reveals surprising and irrefutable evidence of the Bible's influence on our founding fathers and our nation's Constitution. But does a biblically inspired Constitution make America a Christian nation? And is there a place for the Bible in today's modern political climate? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
There was a great study done some years ago by political science professors. They said, you know, the Constitution is a remarkable document. It has ideas that have never before been written down in any previous Constitution. These are novel ideas. Where did the Founding Fathers get these novel ideas? Because our Constitution is not a collection of the world's greatest constitutions.
Right.
I mean, in 1787, they didn't say, oh, let's take 2 clauses from the French Constitution, 2 from the Russian, let's take 1 from the Haitian, 1 from the Helvetican. These are brand new ideas. So these ideas put in a piece of paper, they've been talked about, but they've never been put in a document. Where'd they get their ideas? These political science professors determined that if they could collect 15,000 writings out of the founding era, read those writings and see who they quoted, they would know where the founders get their ideas. They'd know where those ideas, their origins. So they took those 15,000 writings, took them a decade to document, but they found 3,154 direct quotes in those documents. They took all of those direct quotes back to their original source, End of a decade, they say, we've studied it, we know where every one of these quotes came from, we know the source. Turned out the number one most cited source in the founding era when the Constitution was constructed was the Bible. 34% of all quotes. The next cited source was Montesquieu at 8.3%. So you're talking a 4-time differential between your number one source, the Bible, and number two, Montesquieu. Then you come to Blackstone at 7.9, then Locke at 2.3, and on down through your sources. So the Bible, far and away, many times over, is the most cited source during the time when the Constitution was written. That's a pretty good indication it's not a godless document. Numbers of other founding fathers and early American political leaders also declared that America was guided by or founded on Christian principles. Among those making such declarations were Elias Boudinot, a president of Congress during the Revolution, and signers of the Declaration Charles Carroll, John Hancock, Benjamin Rush, Stephen Hopkins, and Samuel Adams. Also citing Christian principles as foundational are Constitution signers George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Rufus King, John Dickinson, and Roger Sherman. Others making similar declarations about Christian principles in America include Samuel Chase, a signer of the Declaration and a U.S. Supreme Court Justice, original Supreme Court Chief Justice John Jay, Justice Joseph Story, Justice James Kent, Zephaniah Swift, author of America's first legal text, and the U.S. Supreme Court itself, not to mention the U.S. Congress, as well as numerous state Supreme Courts and state legislatures. Other famous Americans who claimed that America was a Christian nation or was built on Christian principles included leaders such as General William Eaton, leader of America's first war following the American Revolution, and Daniel Webster, the great defender of the Constitution. U.S. presidents declaring that America was a Christian nation or that it was founded on Christian principles included John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, Woodrow Wilson, Zachary Taylor, Harry Truman, Andrew Jackson, William McKinley, Herbert Hoover, and Teddy Roosevelt. Educational leaders who taught students in classic American textbooks that Christianity was the basis of our country and its government included notables such as Noah Webster, the schoolmaster to America, Jedediah Morse, the father of American geography, and William McGuffey of the famous McGuffey Readers. All of these and so many more founding fathers, leaders, educators, and official departments of government declared that America was a Christian nation or that it was influenced by or built on Christian principles by Christian leaders.
There is an attempt to rewrite history. I think that's a theme inside of the episodes that we have put together. There is a thematic element that revisionism or a revisionist is attempting to either completely walk away from documentation or to cite very few small examples and make it seem like they're painting all of the of the founding fathers the same brush. So ultimately, original intent and some of the works that prove, you go back to the original documents, to the original words, to the original founding fathers' own writings, and we're finding something 180 degrees that we were taught in school.
And what they do with revisionism is not just get things wrong. One of the greatest forms of revisionism is omission. And that's really hard to identify. I mean, if you have a textbook that says Abraham Lincoln dropped a nuclear weapon on Korea to end World War I, we'd all say, that's wrong. That's wrong on 4 counts. But if you have a textbook that doesn't even mention Abraham Lincoln, then you don't notice that. Right. What's not there, you have a tendency not to see. That's one of the greatest forms of revisionism, is simply not to talk about certain elements that had been so significant for so long.
Wow.
Now, you do get some revisionism in textbooks like this. It says it's a godless constitution. That is a rewriting of what's there. But then you also simply get textbooks that don't talk anything about any founding father, about faith or lack of faith, that they're just silent. And that is the worst form of insult, is to be ignored. And that's what we've done with large portions of American history, is simply ignore it. We simply don't talk about it. And that's just as substantial a form of revisionism as is absolutely saying something wrong and rewriting it and making it into something it never said. So that's a form that we have to deal with. But that omission is what causes us not to know the reasons that the Constitution really is not a godless document.
A closer look into our nation's history reveals surprising and irrefutable evidence of the Bible's influence on our founding fathers and our nation's Constitution. But does a biblically inspired Constitution make America a Christian nation? And is there a place for the Bible in today's modern political climate? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
The number one source of the quotes, help me understand it again. So just help me. The number one source of the quotes that the founding fathers found were traced back to the Bible.
That's right. The quotes that they used in political writings describing why they did what they did. Why did they do separation of powers? Where did they come up with the idea of separation of powers? Why did they do checks and balances? Where did they come? You read all the writings that dealt with all those issues, and you see who they're quoting. Well, they'll quote Montesquieu because Montesquieu talks about separation of powers. They'll quote different entities, but when you track every quote back, 3,154 quotes, you track them all back to see the source. The overwhelming source of those ideas is the Bible.
And we have people wanting to tell us we have a godless Constitution.
That's right. But we buy that. I mean, by and large, most Americans buy that. Government is a secular institution. It was designed that way. It's supposed to be that way. Why would they say that? They don't know, but they've never heard any evidence that would indicate otherwise.
I see.
Right.
And so what happens is the absence of evidence is proof of what the assertion is. So when they say it's a godless Constitution, I don't know of any evidence that disproves that. They must be right. And that's where most Americans are. That they don't know about the study of political scientists. They don't know what's called the Sundays Accepted Clause. They don't know about the Common Law Clause in Article 7. They don't know about the 4 oath clauses that are there. They don't know about in the Year of Our Lord clause that appears. There's 6 aspects of the Constitution that absolutely disprove any notion that it's godless. But we don't know what those are. In 1854, following an extensive 1-year investigation, a report in the U.S. Congress succinctly declared,
Had the people during the Revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. At the time of the adoption of the Constitution and the amendments, the universal sentiment was that Christianity should be encouraged, but not any one denomination. In this age, there can be no substitute for Christianity. That was the religion of the founders of the Republic, and they expected it to remain the religion of their descendants.
and half a century later, in 1892, the U.S. Supreme Court also conducted a thorough review of American history. After citing more than 60 historical precedents, the court concluded,
There is no dissonance in these declarations. There is a universal language pervading them all, having one meaning. They affirm and reaffirm that this is a religious nation. This is a Christian nation.
Most folks have never heard of major portions of the Constitution. If I were to say one of the chief ways to keep judicial activism under control in judiciary is the exceptions clause of the Constitution, people would say, what's the exceptions clause? I've never heard of that.
Well, let me just say it right now. What is
What
the
is an
exceptions
exception
clause?
clause?
Okay.
One of the notions that people have is the federal judiciary can deal with any issue that's out there, that they get to put the final word on any issue that is before the court. The Constitution says that the judges can only deal with those issues that Congress give them permission to deal with. So Congress can, and that's what's called the exceptions clause. The court can deal with anything except those issues that Congress withholds from it. So we don't have to have a constitutional amendment to have voluntary school prayer. Congress can simply pass a law that says no federal judge can deal with the issue of prayer at a football game. We've accepted it out of their dominion.
Wow.
It's been done over 200 times in American history. It's a great way to keep judges under control because consistently what we have now is the higher the poll number of the people supporting an issue, the more likely it is for the judges to strike it down.
Wow.
They've gone into this mentality that says the role of the judiciary is to protect the minority from the majority. Wait a minute, that's oxymoronic. Because what you just said is the role of the judiciary is to make the minority into the majority.
Right.
Then who protects the majority from the minority? You know, only one side ever wins in politics, and it's supposed to be the bigger side. That's why it's the consent of the governed. Judiciary is taking it on themselves to say, oh, if the governed are for it, that's unfair. So if we have a person over here that's an atheist and doesn't want to hear anybody else say under God in the pledge, we'll make you all stop so that he won't be offended. That's not the role of government.
And the Founding
that's a problem.
Fathers set forth a provision to keep that
That's
kind
right.
of nonsense from happening.
That's right.
And we don't hear about it,
We don't-
nor do
we
we
don't hear about it.
just
Act on
debate
and
it.
everything.
Do you know the Constitution is such an easy document? It is a short document. You can sit down, you can read it in a half an hour. It's just not a hard document to read. Most Americans have never read it even once in their life. In the period of time it takes to watch a sitcom, you could read the Constitution and know what that document says. But we rely on media to tell us what it says. We rely on law professors. We rely on guys like this to tell us what it says.
Yeah.
If we read it for ourselves, it's a no-brainer. It's a very easy thing.
A closer look into our nation's history reveals surprising and irrefutable evidence of the Bible's influence on our founding fathers and our nation's Constitution. But does a biblically inspired Constitution make America a Christian nation? And is there a place for the Bible in today's modern political climate? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
It was because of our strong Christian faith that our founders were so willing to welcome those of other faiths to America. Our founders knew the truth of Christianity, and they believed that Christianity would prevail on its own merits without the need for force or coercion. As explained by Thomas Jefferson,
truth can stand by itself. Why subject opinion to coercion to produce uniformity? Is uniformity attainable? Millions of innocent men, women, and children since the introduction of Christianity have been burnt, tortured, fined, imprisoned, yet we have not advanced 1 inch towards uniformity. What has been the effect of coercion? To make one half the world fools and the other half hypocrites. If there be but one right religion, and Christianity that one, we should wish to see the 999 wandering sects gathered into the fold of truth. But against such a majority, we cannot effect this by force. Reason and persuasion are the only practicable instruments. To make way for these, free inquiry must be indulged. And how can we wish others to indulge it while we refuse it ourselves?
consequently, our founding fathers openly acknowledged and welcomed the presence of numerous religious groups in America, including Buddhists, Muslims, and Jews. In fact, Dr. Benjamin Rush, a signer of the Declaration and one of the most evangelical Christians among the founding fathers, openly declared,
"Such is my veneration for every religion that reveals the attributes of the deity, or a future state of rewards and punishments, that I had rather see the opinions of Confucius or Muhammad inculcated upon our youth, than see them grow up wholly devoid of a system of religious principles. But the religion I mean to recommend in this place is that of the New Testament."
And while describing a federal parade in Philadelphia, Dr. Rush commented,
"The rabbi of the Jews, locked in the arms of two ministers of the gospel, was a most delightful sight. There could not have been a more happy emblem."
and Elias Boudinot, a president of Congress during the American Revolution, served as president of the Society for Ameliorating the State of the Jews, and he made personal provision for bringing persecuted Jews to America. This tolerance for other faiths and religions, however, did not alter or negate the fact that America was founded by Christians on Christian principles. If America will go back to its roots, they'll find out, the founding fathers, using biblical wisdom, have given us all sorts of tools. The Bible says there's nothing new under the sun.
Wow.
Those principles are universal, and by the way, they're not just American principles. Not only is God no respecter of persons, He's no respecter of nations.
Yes.
Any nation that will take these principles and apply them, the biblical principle out of Jeremiah 17:9 on separation of powers, any nation that wants to use that, it's going to work.
Yes.
Okay, so if all of the quotes that revert back to the Bible and all the wisdom comes from the Bible, then are we living in a theocracy? at this
Yeah,
point in the United States.
That's certainly what the seculars claim. Oh, you guys want religion involved? Why, that's a theocracy. You have to go, time out. The reason we have a successful constitutional republic is because religion was involved. That's what gave us these ideas. You get republicanism out of Exodus 18:21. That's Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. Article 3, Section 1, dealing with certain forms of punishment, comes right out of Ezekiel. I mean, there's so many clauses of the Bible that we find in the Constitution, certainly biblical concepts. That's why historians have shown that there's nothing that appears in the Declaration of the Constitution that wasn't already taught in the American pulpit before 1763.
Wow.
So what we're saying is these biblical ideas, and people today think the Bible is a tiny little narrow aspect of living. It deals with eternal life. Well, it does. It deals with spiritual life in the future, but it deals with practical life right now. You find the free enterprise system in the Bible. You find proper and improper forms of taxation in the Bible. The Bible talks about capital gains taxes. The Bible talks about minimum wage. The Bible talks about all these things. Christians think it's just a little bitty spiritual book. It's not. So what happens is all these biblical ideas create the environment and the document and the specific ideas in those documents. And today we're being told, oh, if you believe those ideas, that's a theocracy. Now how oxymoronic is that? The very ideas that produced republicanism and free government we're now being told that that's what creates a theocracy. So what they do is they say, oh, you guys with those ideas have to stay out of the government. No. The reason we have the government is because those ideas were in the government.
Right.
That's not a theocracy, not by any means. Founding Fathers had a great love for separation, church and state. They didn't want the two institutions running each other. But they did not have a great love for separating God from government or God from any aspect of life. And that's what people who yell theocracy today mean. They say, oh, you're trying to impose your values on me. Well, the value that says don't kill is a biblical value. You're right, I'm trying to impose that on you.
Correct.
But that doesn't make it a theocracy because there are certain sets of values to which society adheres that we choose to use as our standard of living. That's not a theocracy. A theocracy is when you get one person who rules in the name of God above all other wills. That's the divine right of kings. There's nobody in America that wants a theocracy. So the nonsense that if you say religion's involved in government, you're establishing theocracy, it's meant to scare people of faith from being involved. It's an intimidation phrase. That's all.
For more information on the American Heritage Series or to find books and other resources, visit wallbuilders.com. Through the American Heritage Series, renowned historian David Barton communicates our nation's forgotten, godly foundations and encourages us to once again view history through a truthful lens. For only when we recognize and embrace God's hand in our history can America become all that it was intended to be. Through Wall Builders, historian David Barton seeks to rebuild the walls of America's unique religious, moral, and constitutional heritage by educating the public and encouraging people of faith to become active in strengthening America's great foundations. For more information on how you can become involved, visit wallbuilders.com.